Okay, welcome to Let's Drawk About It, a podcast where we remove the two most important tools for drawing, the eyes and the hands. I'm curious to see how it affects the way we think about drawing by putting some limitations on ourselves. And for the first episode of the podcast, we have invited my good friend Ørjan Nyheim, who is an architect at Pier 2 in Trondheim. And he's been working as an architect for 15 years now. More or less. Starting quite early on in his career with complex and demanding projects. Ørjan is, as I know him, extremely hardworking. He's very generous with his co-workers and has a very clear and efficient way of drawing. And he uses this to both figure out and communicate solutions to architectural questions. Ørjan and I go way back to our first year of architecture school in 2004, I think. And we have done projects together since 2007. And as far as I remember, you didn't really have a background from drawing and aesthetic things from before. Could you tell me a bit of how you entered drawing, your entry to drawing, and how did you end up as an architect?
I looked at architecture through the eyes of my neighbor, who was actually an architect when I was a kid. So I saw that man and his career and the way of life that he had, and I just was inspired by that way of life. And I didn't really think about the need to be good at drawing before I started at the university. So I made a lot of drawings in high school and etc., but not in the way I do now.
What kind of drawings did you do?
More like what you say, doodling, like small sketches, just twirling around when doing notes for studying other things. More like a nervous tic, I guess. I think I have it after my mother because she does the same thing. And she has never made a pure drawing ever in her life, I think.
A drawing for drawing itself.
Just doodling around.
Yeah.
So it might be some genetics there. I'm not sure.
Thinking about that, you came from not a background from drawing. You've had a very impressive development as a creative practitioner, going from very little experience with drawing to being an architect that makes some of the most precise and communicating drawings I've seen. What do you think has made this rise to efficiency and this level of competence so quickly?
It's funny you should say quickly, because during the last weekend when I was preparing this last lecture, I briefed through my old sketchbooks from the time at the university, and the 3 first years were mostly crap and are not suitable for showing anyone, really. So I think I needed some time to just get into it.
But how did you deal with that? Because I'm sure I came from an artistic background, so for me, a lot of these things were natural, and I had lots of practice before I started. And then I felt confident going into this. How did you overcome this kind of awkwardness and the limitations of not knowing the tools and still drew a lot, even though you didn't feel you managed to do it properly?
I think I was very curious about how architects were supposed to make drawings. And this was back in 2003. It actually started the year before I started in architecture school, because I had a semester at civil engineering and I spent a lot of time at the library looking into books about architecture because I hated studying civil engineering. So already before I started the architectural study, the master, I was inspired by these different types of drawings that different types of architects make. And I remember this book by, I think it's Francis Ching, which is called Architectural Graphics, which is actually a book I discovered before starting up in architecture school. And this is a book, for those who doesn't know, it's a book which basically explains different types of drawings, different types of techniques, different types of pens and pencils, and how traditionally architects make drawings or sketches or illustrations So I think I really wanted to learn how to be an architect and do these things. And I had no boundaries in the amount of time I used studying the literature and books that were on the subject at the time.
Did you mostly draw all the time, just draw and testing things, or did you actually study the techniques and sort of the look of other drawings and sort of copy them and trying to figure out more analytically?
Yeah, in the beginning it was more like copying the style of things I saw. because I started doing this actually before we started studying architecture. So I started studying these types of drawings actually before I really got to know anything about what is architecture about. That might be a part of it. And also during the first years of architecture school, I spent quite a lot of time seeing what other students did and kind of thinking about what I liked and didn't like about the styles and the methods of my fellow students. And I think in the beginning, I spent quite a lot of time studying the drawings for themselves more than what the drawings were showing in a way, which maybe separated me from some of the other students. Maybe, I'm not sure.
It sounds like you were quite engaged in trying to figure out drawing itself, not only the reason for, like most people use drawing as a tool, like because you need to draw something, or you use it as leisure activity just to pass time. But you actually wanted to understand what made drawings tick, or what made them, what is this fascination?
Yeah, and I think in architecture school, the first years, I spent more time maybe looking at the drawings more than the architecture inside the drawings. And that I don't think many in our class did that at that time, maybe. Yeah.
I think you're right. Did you think of that actively when you were in the first years, or is this something you've...
I wasn't very conscious about anything in those years, I think.
The joys of youth.
Yeah, so I think this more mature way of thinking has come since, I think. Yeah.
Oh.
So I just did what's interesting and natural at the time.
Yeah. Me and Ørjan, for you listeners, we have run 2 architect studios together, Tyn Tegnestø and Fur Arkitekter. And sometimes we've spent more time together than our spouses and our families. Since we closed the studios, we haven't spent that much time together. Could you say what's going on in your drawing life these days?
Ooh, I have a daughter which is 8 now, and she's going to school like every other child. We tend to spend a lot of time in the afternoons around the kitchen table where she's doing her homework, and I often sit by her side and just doing some drawing exercises or just drawing, just to be at the table together with her and just doing something manual because she's doing manual homework, like with a pencil and paper. So it's a way of just showing her that I'm there and just doing something, me too. And that often leads to her catching interest in what I do and vice versa. So that's usually a lot of afternoons.
Do you see that she takes after? Do you have any? Does she draw different drawings than her peers?
Well, yeah, I think so, because she's doing like section drawings and talk about a plan drawing as a thing. And I don't think a lot of 8-year-olds do that. And I think that's just her copying me. Obviously, she doesn't know really what it is. She thinks she knows what it is. And she copies the type of drawing. And in the interesting way, she tends to hit some interesting things when she's doing this.
So do you feel you get some inspiration from her too?
Yeah, obviously, because she does quite few quirky things that I wouldn't kind of think about doing or just won't do, even subconsciously. So I think there's something about the youth mind and the untrainedness in her. She can do stuff that I can't.
We also had a lecture with you yesterday. You had a lecture for the students in our course, and you explained a bit of what kind of drawings you do now and what kind of sort of professional drawing setting you are in. Could you do a sort of a summary of the things you presented? What kind of drawings do you make mostly these days?
Well, mostly I make traditional digital drawings, plan, section, elevations, basically 2-dimensional abstractions of the real world. And I often print those and do something about them manually with pen, paper, cutting, gluing, or just sketching on top of them. And I think I can relate this to, again, my daughter and her untrainedness in a way, because I think there is something in ourselves when we get to be 40 plus and almost 20 years of experience. I talked about Odd Nerdrum's quote about this academic clumsiness. We tend to be kind of locked up in a lot of experience and smartness and experience of dumb and smart things to do in projects. which leads us to do the same thing again and again. And we need, at least I have to challenge myself in a conscious way to do something new or try to kind of push the way I'm working. Because if I just do the automatic things on the computer like I did last time, it will be quite okay, perhaps even very good. But it kind of butts against the wall sometimes.
What would you say is the weirdest or most unusual method of drawing that you apply in your work?
I'm quite good at drawing with my right hand, and I'm really crap with my left. I have never used my left hand. So sometimes I actually just force myself to use the wrong arm just to do something with the lines on the paper that I really can't control in a way. And sometimes I even, when I'm using tracing, like this very thin sketch paper, which is very transparent, I can even put the drawings upside down, draw something and flip it so I get this mirror effect, just to make myself do something that is uncontrollable in a way.
So you actively try to get out of, you could call it the comfort zone or your comfort zone of expertise to achieve different insights, or is it
just to do something, just to create something on top of what is perhaps already well thought out? It could be a plan drawing of a bedroom, and there's something there that's maybe very traditional. And what can you do with that? Just create something I'm not able to think of and just do on the computer. And very often it's not, the results are not interesting at all. But sometimes something happens. Maybe a proportion pops out, something I want to try out, maybe in another project or at another place in this project. But it's all about creating something on autopilot in a way that you don't think about before you draw it. Because everything we do, we at least on a computer, we move lines. They are precisely 600 millimeters that way or 2 meters that way, to force ourselves to do something that is more random, maybe even. I think there's something interesting about that.
And you've been drawing now actively every day for 20 years. 21 years, I would presume. Years. 22 if you count the year before. Years, yeah, that's a long time. And it seems to me that you still find drawing interesting and fulfilling. What's the most fascinating aspect of drawing for you?
I have to say the re-exploring the pencil, like a mechanical graphite tool that has this limited gradient effect or ability, starting from the pure blackness to the almost whiteness on white paper. I've experienced this several times during the last 20 years that I come back to the pencil. There's something there. And sometimes I'm doing this Pantone part of my life or phase, not black colors at all, but I always come back to the pencil.
Yeah.
There's something there, yeah.
And before you came here, I challenged you to bring your favorite drawing tool and your favorite drawing medium. Could you describe the tool you have and the medium you brought?
The tool I'm actually holding in my hand is a traditional, quite cheap mechanical pencil. It's a 0.5 millimeter Pentel. At the moment, I have different types. They are not that important. But 0.5 millimeters, making this sound. I think I have to say that the favorite tool to draw on is my sketchbook. It's a Muji natural colored paper with this 5 by 5 millimeters dotted pages, which makes like a subtle help lines, grid lines to sketch on top. And it's in, I think the format is A5, which is perfect to get inside a coat or in the backpack always.
And as far as I know, you have used similar kinds of sketchbook now for years, and you have quite a big collection. What made you choose this kind of format? Yes, it fits in a jacket. Is there other things that you prefer with this kind of?
Yeah, actually, the way I discovered precisely this type of book was a YouTube channel called 30 by 40, which is, I think is American. Let's say it's American. American architect, which has made a YouTube series about what architects do, how he develops projects. And he's very talented using different types of drawing techniques using pen and paper on top of digital drawings. And he has several episodes where he discusses different types of sketchbooks and why this type of book is his favorite. And then I tried it and I really like it. Both the color and the feel of the paper. It's quite hard to explain because it's just paper. But there's something about it. I really like the dotted lines or dotted grid and the way this spiral backing can open it and make it totally flat, which is perfect. So I've been using these for, 5-6 years now. They're not available in Norway. So I have to, a few times abroad, I tend to buy a stack. So last summer I was in Paris and I went to the Muji store there and bought, I think, 10 of these. So I have at least a couple of years of books now.
This reminds me of, you see these interviews with really expert musicians or expert any kind of craftsperson, a person that uses his creativity to do stuff, and they always have this: I need to have this kind of string on the guitar and this guitar maker. And I realize now, because we are so used to draw and have done it for so many years, we're getting nerdy.
But I have to just comment because I'm quite uncritical in a way about what I draw on. In my daily work, I tend to draw a lot of paper towels or tracing offends or just the backside of a printed drawing lying on the table of my colleague's table. So the sketchbook is more like a personal thing for me. I don't often make drawings in the book that I show to others.
It brings me to my next point, because for many people, drawing is an activity in itself, soul searching or some kind of therapy or just for joy. But for you, it seems like it has mainly utilitarian or a practical, pragmatic purpose. How do you see, and why do you see drawing as a tool more than a creative endeavor?
Oh, that's a difficult question to answer, I think, because one can argue and compare it to one of my other hobbies, that is some kind of woodworking hobby. And it's easy to think of that as just leisure time activity, doing something that is not work. But I think it's more intertwined and connected in a way. So even though it feels like it's a hobby, it's also something that is deeply rooted in things that I'm really interested in. And that connects with my field of work. And there are very many gray areas. What is work and what is not work?
Yeah, I think
there's a very wide gradient between work and private life, I think, for me at least.
Yeah, and maybe for many architects, I say sometimes to my students that you don't work as an architect, you become an architect, and it's part of your whole being. It can't all be honey and roses, and you can't always manage these drawings. And what's the worst part of drawing for you?
I think sometimes during creative processes, you just need 10 lines to make something interesting or beautiful, and it can take 5 seconds. You hit that sweet spot. But sometimes you can just sit and try for hours, and you just can't get it right. Or it just won't be interesting, or you just can't get it to move forward in a way.
What do you do when you're stuck like that?
I often just take a break doing something else.
Just give up?
I just basically give up or postpone it. Or I just use some of these techniques to make myself go in a surprising direction. I can even just give the drawing to a colleague at work, for instance, and say, can you make 5 lines random? And they will not understand why, and they will just do something, and that might help me to just, okay, there's something there, and just start on another path. Or I can even ask my 8-year-old at home to do something, or just tell me something to do. Different types of help to get me going again.
Some kind of trigger?
Yeah, trigger might be a good word.
What do you think drawings do that other mediums and tools can't do?
There's something about this unconsciousness or subconsciousness that you just do something. And sometimes I can sit, and that's the main difference between working on a computer and doing manual drawings by hand, is a computer never does anything without you consciously telling it to do that specific thing. So if I'm just sitting and making loose ideas come to life, a computer is not the tool for me. So I often switch back and forth between the drawing on paper and on the computer just to get this kind of flow going. So I think I'm the one at the office that prints the most. So I have quite a lot of print counts. But and sometimes I just print it, look at it on paper, and I don't draw anything. I just, this pure sensation of the abstraction of a print in hand makes or gives a different perspective than seeing something on screen. Sometimes I just put a paper of a drawing on the table and just move back or very close, and that just changes things in another way than the computer is able to. Sometimes that's just what you need to move forward.
Drawing is, of course, a big part of the lives we have as architects. It's, you could call it our main language. What would you do if drawing wasn't an option for you?
Ooh, that would have been quite difficult for me, I think, because I know some architects that are great with words and how they can explain buildings, sensations, explain spaces, and how you feel when you enter the spaces. That has never been my kind of main way of making architecture. So I think that would have kind of been quite critical, I think, for me, and would have at least forced me to spend time searching to learn these skills in another way.
Would you still be an architect?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I'm not great with words either. So
that's why I invited you to the podcast for the first episode.
No, I think I often have this mantra that show, don't tell. So show what you're doing or what you want to do. Don't tell people how nice it's going to be. Show them how nice it's going to be. And then you don't even have to tell. They will understand themselves. That would have been an interesting challenge.
You could try it for one day, maybe. See how it feels.
At least a couple of hours before lunch, maybe. Yeah.
Okay, I also have prepared a small section I call Quick Shotgun Round, where I just pose a word pair or two different things, and you can just say what you feel is closest to you or most relevant or most interesting. Sketch or masterpiece?
Sketch.
Analog or digital?
Analog.
2D or 3D?
3D.
Grayscale or color?
Grayscale.
Wet or dry?
Ooh. Dry.
Cool. I was surprised you used more time on the wet or dry. I thought it was obvious that it was dry. But I guess because you also use quite a lot of markers and...
Yeah, and I'm also in this, I'm in my rediscovering of the graphic pencil era again. And this wetness, you actually can create wetness with a very dry graphite tool.
It's a bit like concrete can be soft.
Yeah, in a way, it can. It's not easy, it's difficult. But when you get it, sometimes you get there. And it's very interesting to create wetness out of a very dry tool.
And you forgot to mention how soft the lead in your pencil is.
Yes, I never use harder than 2B. So it's quite soft. And that's because I tend to draw quite hard. And I've done that for quite a lot of years. So to force myself to not put a dent in the paper or the table, I'm using a softer graphite to just make it float more freely in a way. Yeah.
And now for some, you have to think back on your early memories of drawing. What's the first drawing you remember making in life?
Actually, I have an answer for that, I think, because I remember my mother sitting on what we might translate to the phone desk that the Norwegian homes had.
We have to explain to our young listeners. When me and Ørjan was young, we actually had physical phones with phone lines attached to the wall, and you had to sit in the hallway often and talk to the neighbor or uncle.
So often homes in the 80s, 1980s had benches, often right inside of the main entrance to the house. And there was a bench, and the phone was either put on the bench or on the wall right beside. And home, we had this combined bench with a small drawer, and there was a notebook with a pen, like what you call these roller pens.
Yeah, the ink roller pen, big pens.
Big pens, yes.
And it was to draw notes if someone said, remember this, and remember, again, we didn't have any other storage device than this.
So there were always a notebook there. And I remember my mother always, when she was on the phone, she was sitting with this notebook and making this type of, I'm doing this as I'm explaining it, this doodling, as I'm calling it. She just made some different types of shapes, and she hatched it in different, like heavy hatching and gradient to zero in a way.
The sketch you're making looks a bit like a bunch of grapes.
Yeah, and sometimes it was lines or cross-hatching and square shapes. Sometimes they were round. They were often just continuous, and they just created different types of patterns. And this big pen with this rolling ball could also create this quite interesting gradient from nothing to all blue, which was the color. And I remember picking up this notebook. Can't remember when or how old I was.
Was it like 7, 4, 10?
It was before school. So I guess I was maybe 5, 6, something like that. And I picked up the same pen and the same notebook as my mother had used, and just made a copy of my mother's doodling sketch on the side of it. And I remember this because she made a remark that I was doing kind of the same thing as her. And I can't remember what she said or how she commented on it. I just remember this setting that she commented on me doing the same as her, even though I was just a little kid. So I think that's the first drawing I can remember. Yeah, I think so.
And then the opposite, what was the last drawing? Not thinking of the drawings you've made today, because Ørjan has been drawing here when we've been talking. What was the last drawing you made then?
The last drawing? Yeah, that was a drawing on the office today. We were discussing, it's a healthcare center, which has this space for cleaning different type of medical.
Like for cleaning medical equipment and these things?
Yeah, but more like for older people and when they need help going to the bathroom, etc. Yeah. So really the most basic way of tools for a human in a way. These are spaces that are pure utilitarian in a way, and really all about logistics, a very clean and not so clean side of the space.
So a far cry from your mother's doodles in the 80s.
Oh yeah. So that was the last thing I did before I left work today.
What would be your number one advice for someone that's studying drawing?
I would recommend trying out different techniques, obviously, just to see what other people are doing. Try them out for yourself. Find something that works for you and what you find interesting. And for me, that has changed throughout the years. I remember during my time at the university, I was very conscious about these different types of fiber pens, doing 0.1 thickness lines and 0.9. But now I'm more like thin and thick. That's all I need in a way. Mixing medias and just trying new things. Yeah. And for me, I had a time after architecture school where I was kind of limited if I hadn't my sketchbook and my favorite pen at the time. So then it often resulted in me not doing drawings. And I just had to make myself accept that the tool doesn't matter. So I'm more free in just picking something up and doing something with it. And that the result doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a beautiful drawing, because it usually isn't in my case. It's just something.
I think this talk has been really interesting, and I hope the same goes for the people listening. For me, the most important part of this is the way you describe drawing as a fascination in itself, that you actually went in to study drawing, and that the drawing itself, the content of the drawing isn't necessarily the most important. And also the fact that you say that you have very specific tools that you bring wherever you go, but you don't really need to have those tools. I think that's perfect, since the name of the course we run with the students is called Drawing as a Tool for Thinking. It's a tool first and foremost. A big thanks to Ørjan for coming here to share his perspective. I really appreciate this talk. And then I think the only thing we have to do is go out into the world and talk about it. Thank you for listening.